Um,
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. I welcome you with the Arabic words of peace. I'm glad that you all are able to join us today. We are honored to have our dear brother, Bill Chambers, back with us again for part two of a discussion of the Palestinian Israeli conflict. On behalf of the Ta'Leem Committee, committee chairs, Dr. Aisha El-Amin, Dr. Gloria Bashir, and Sister Rashida Fitzpatrick. Again, we're very honored and thankful that you are with us today. For those of you who joined us last week, you know what a dynamic presentation Brother Bill gave really set the foundation for deepening our understanding of the conflict that's happening in the Middle East. We know that we are bombarded with a deluge of misinformation and salaciousness. And so we're happy that we have someone who's a part of our community that's not only been there and engaged in really deep activist work, but also just has the general knowledge and wisdom to share with us to help expand our understanding of what's happening so that we can be better able to decipher what's real and what's not. So without further ado, I turn it over to Brother Bill Chambers.
all right, thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum all, and you'll be handing over the control to me, I believe, right?
That's correct. And I am
Okay,
pinning you so
sounds good.
everyone can see you.
Okay. Um, let's put this down here a little bit. Last time we talked about, let me just get this up here. Well, let me see if I can get this started again. Well, while I'm doing this, let's talk about last time. One of the things I did was talk about the 4 trips that I took to Palestine. I was able to talk through some of the things that happened on the trips that I took there. Let's see. I'm going to try to get this shared again. For some reason, it doesn't seem to want to come up. Let's say, whoa. Okay. Well, sorry. I just definitely didn't want to have a few technical difficulties here. It looks like I'm probably gone. Oh no, I'm still there. Okay.
You're still here. If you
Yeah,
want,
I'm still here. Let me
Brother Bill,
see
you
if
can.
I can get this present through my 4 trips that I took to Palestine. And what I'm going to do this time is go through a little bit of history. It's really a history of settler colonialism and how Palestine has gotten to the place that it is now. And then the rest of the time, we'll be talking about Gaza and what's happening right now in Gaza and what you can do um, to provide support for the Palestinians. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to play a very short video. This video is from Jewish Voice for Peace. They're one of the groups, including the United States Palestinian Community Network and American Muslims for Palestine, that are most involved in most of the protests that are going on. So let me get this started. It provides a background that is much easier for it to, there we go.
Brother Bill, are you trying to show the video now? Are you?
Okay, so I'll just bring up some of the things that were mentioned in the video. And Basically, what when we talk about the history of Palestine, we're talking about the history of settler colonialism. One of the things the video talked about was you had a certain set of refugees, Jewish refugees, leaving World War II Europe and coming and replacing or attempting to replace Palestinians that are in Palestine, and in fact, Palestinians and Jewish people have lived in Palestine peacefully for hundreds of years. But in 1947, when the Jewish state was declared, right before that time, that was really a British colony. And that's one of the things to look at. And in fact, a big reason why the Zionists that came up with this idea of needing a home to get away from the anti-Semitism in Europe was the fact that, during World War II and afterwards, a lot of countries like the United States and Britain, they didn't want to accept Jews. And in fact, Britain, as you know, is one of the major colonial powers. They owned Palestine. They were one of the colonial powers that got control over that particular area after World War I and World War II. They encouraged, for this Balfour Declaration, I won't go into that detail, but they encouraged the Jewish settlers to come into Palestine. And eventually, when obviously the Palestinians who had been living there for hundreds of years fought back, what we would call now the Israeli occupation force fought back and destroyed several hundreds of Palestinian villages and basically created a whole new set of refugees, Palestinian refugees, and there's millions of Palestinian refugees all around the world. And I don't know if a lot of people realize that Chicago has the largest population of Palestinians of any city in the United States. So when I'm talking here about settler colonialism, let's go to that violent settler colonialism point. This group of settlers was born in violence. This was born in a war against the indigenous people, the Palestinians of Palestine, and were designed in the beginning to push them out of these borders of an Israeli state that the settlers wanted to create. And that is still going on today. You can see the point about right now, there's even in the West Bank, there's 500,000 at least Israeli settlers. And that's in the West Bank that is supposed to be under Palestinian control. And I think if you remember, if you were here last time, you saw some of the pictures that I took of like in East Jerusalem when these settlers were trying to take over houses that Palestinians were still living in. And then the pictures of Hebron or El Khalil, where there was the grating and the chicken wire on top, where the Israeli settlers would throw garbage and feces and everything down upon Palestinians that would try to walk through this market area that's since been closed. So these are very violent people. They spend a lot of time on their settlements in the West Bank, particularly coming out of the hills, cutting down trees, burning up crops. So this is the kind of settlers we're talking about. I almost like to compare them to like the Ku Klux Klan if they were running the country. We call it apartheid Israel, and that's one of the things that it's talked about in the short film, is that it's very important to realize that the reason that it's called that is very similar to what apartheid South Africa was, where there were certain Batustans that Black South Africans were kind of jammed into, and they had a whole different set of laws that applied to them as to the white minority in South Africa. It's the same thing in apartheid Israel. So last time we talked about how there's a different set of laws If you live in Gaza and you live in the West Bank and you're Palestinian, you're under military law and you go in front of military courts. And we talked about how people can be detained for 60 days at a time without any evidence, and that can kind of go on indefinitely. But the other part of apartheid Israel is also if you happen to be a Palestinian citizen of Israel, and there are many, um, you also don't have the same equal treatment under law. So, for example, if you're in Haifa, is a good example of a large city that has a large number of Palestinians inside of apartheid Israel, and you own a house, you cannot expand that house. You can try, like you want to put another bedroom on, you can try to uh, request a permit, and it doesn't say you can't do that, but your permit never gets approved. And you can't sell it to somebody else, because if you try to sell it to somebody else, one of the Israeli settlers or Israelis will come in and take over the house. In fact, I know a lot of different Palestinian friends that I've had that, particularly even in the West Bank or even in apartheid Israel itself, if they might have been living in the house for generations, and if they let's say their grandparents have been there, but the grandparents have died, and there's no one living there, they have to keep going back to that house to make sure the settlers or somebody else doesn't kind of come in and try to take over. So the whole history of this is the expansion of more and more land. The current government is very open about that. They want to take over all of the West Bank. We'll get to what they want to do with Gaza later, but so that's the point when we keep talking about it being apartheid Israel. And there's a number of other rules and laws, like if you wanted to get married to someone in the West Bank and you were in apartheid Israel, you couldn't. You just couldn't marry him. So one of the things that's misguided information, and I think really on purpose, is the fact that the Palestinians have always been violent, and why don't they try nonviolence? Why don't they try to do what Martin Luther King did, or Dr. Martin Luther King, or something like that, or Gandhi? Well, the truth is they have tried nonviolent resistance for many years, and they're only met with violence. So in the last presentation, I talked about us meeting the mayor of Nablus, who had his two legs blown off by a bomb that was put underneath his car. Why was that? Well, he was part of a group of mayors of different Palestinian towns in the West Bank that were nonviolently trying to get together and were protesting these settlers and people moving into their communities. Well, that was nonviolence, but you can see how it was met with that. The boycott, divestment, sanction movement has been going on since 2005. That is a nonviolent movement. It's boycotting Israeli goods, particularly ones that are created or grown or whatever in settlements. Divestment is things like it used to be the case, and it might still be, that like pension funds, like for the state of Illinois, has pension funds invested in Israeli bonds. And the only thing Israeli bonds are used for is to expand settlements and support the army and those kind of things. And sanctions is what you would think of, the sanctions that we would put on Russia or Iran or Iraq, but somehow we never seem to be putting sanctions on the state of apartheid Israel, no matter how many human rights violations they have. So this movement's been going along for a long time, and even though it's nonviolent, here, even in the U.S., it's been suppressed. You can see the number of states that have passed bills or orders or whatever to discourage these boycotts. Well, it's more than discourage. You could be fined or even jailed if you participate in some of these BDF movements. So let's talk about what actually happened in the war on Gaza. The first point to make is that Hamas was democratically elected back in 2006. And this was a parliamentary election that was held in Gaza and the West Bank. Hamas won because at the time they were the least corrupt, provided the most social services in Gaza, and they were popular for doing those types of things. Um, on one of the trips that I took to Palestine, we met with the head of the Palestine Legal Board. And this was one of the things he told us was the U.S. aid, which provides obviously aid to different countries. They were very excited about this being the first democratic election in Palestine, and they provided them with this board with all these pamphlets about democracy and how you vote and how you run an election and all this kind of stuff. And I remember this president like looking at me and saying, well, yeah, so Hamas, this was a democratic election and observers and everything. Hamas was elected. But what happened? Well, the Israelis declared them a terrorist group. The US did the same. So, democracy is great, but we don't kind of like the outcome. So we're going to demonize the group that took control. So, yes, so Hamas has been managing Gaza since that time. And the other thing that's important to remember that there's been 5 different wars on Gaza. This is only the 5th. The last one has some detail here, was in 2014. And I remember the protests and all the things that happened around that. There were large protests. And if you look at the number of Palestinians that were killed, I mean, certainly at the time, this it was huge, 2,200 Palestinians and hardly, very few Israelis, and they were mostly soldiers. And it was a similar kind of thing. The Israeli army went in there and started bombing and went in there with troops and so on. The other important thing to know is that the blockade on Gaza has been going on since 2007. So basically about a year after they were elected. And that means nothing goes into Gaza without Israel examining it. They have a list of approved and not approved materials. Practically any, I think during this last war, I remember there was a big issue about construction materials. Like they had destroyed a bunch of houses and buildings like they usually do, but they wouldn't let any construction materials in to rebuild because, well, who knows what they're going to use that for, So it's very restrictive, and basically Gazans cannot leave. They can't come and go except for like very certain exceptions. And the Israeli occupation force guards both the Egypt border on one side and then the apartheid Israel border on the other. One comparison, and I know one of the people that watched the last person that watched the last presentation I gave, he said really gave him an idea about what Palestinians have to go through every day, all these checkpoints and this abuse and so on. Well, one of the things I wanted to get an idea of, to give you all an idea what it must be like to live in Gaza. So if you look at the south side of Chicago and its square footage, it's only about 20 square miles less than Gaza. So this gives you an idea how small Gaza is. But imagine that same area, the south side of Chicago, having 3 times as many people. So it's clearly very, very crowded. And just like south side of Chicago, there's a number of hospitals, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, that are being bombed. Imagine that any food coming in through Indiana or the north side of Chicago was looked over by soldiers, and nothing could come in except for their approval. And the fact that you couldn't leave. I mean, you might want to go to school at the Northwestern or something, but no, you'd have to you'd have to probably go to University of Chicago. I mean, that was it. And there wasn't anywhere you could get a job outside of the South Side of Chicago. That was it. So that gives you an idea of what this probably feels like or what it looks like. So on October 7th is the date that they keep mentioning when this massacre by Hamas happened. And originally it was 1,400 people Israelis who were killed. And you'll still hear that number thrown out there, 1,400, 1,400. Well, it was reduced over time by the Israelis to 1,147. And then some of those soldiers were actually civilians that some of them were killed by Hamas, but some were also killed by the IDF. So there's even a lot of propaganda going on around that particular period of time. So if you look at again, this is what actually happened. These are the statistics, and I can tell you in doing this presentation, I literally was updating these statistics every single day. So this site updated this morning. The number of Palestinians killed is now over 25,000. It just went over that yesterday. And the figure they usually say is about women and children are about 2/3 of that figure. But they can definitely say there's 12,000 or more children that have been killed in this attack. Also, it's important to realize is that there's also Palestinians being killed in the West Bank. So 388 may not seem like a large number, but you got to wonder, okay, there's this war supposedly going on against Hamas and not against Palestinians, and it's really against Palestinians. Why all these people are being killed also in the West Bank? And you can kind of see the difference between here's the Israeli soldiers, 530 to 25,000 people killed, and they think it's actually more like 30 with people being under the rubble and so on. And the other important statistic here is the one at the bottom. So there's about 2.3 million people, Palestinians in Gaza, almost more, definitely 2/3, 3/4 have been displaced. And you've probably heard, when they first invaded the north, they said, well, we want all the Palestinians out of the north because we're going to start bombing it. And then they sent the Palestinians to the south. Well, of course, we knew what was going to happen, that then they started bombing the south. And then the Palestinians tried to shelter, like in refugee camps or by hospitals, but those were bombed also. So this is a huge dislocation of a very large number of people. So again, it's not only the people that were killed and injured and so on, it's the number of people who are out of their homes. So one of the things that's important to look at is the Western media distortion, and there's plenty of that's been happening that Dr. Lionel mentioned. Why is it called? You always hear it called the Israeli-Hamas war. Well, it's called that for a specific purpose because they want to demonize Hamas. Oh, this isn't against all Palestinians. We're just attacking Hamas, and we all know Hamas are all terrorists, and all the people in Gaza voted for Hamas, so they must all be terrorists too. I mean, it's truthfully, it's the apartheid Israel against the war on the Palestinians, because it doesn't matter where the Palestinians are. There's a war going on there, and there was also a lot of demonization of Hamas. If you remember early on, they said there was it was a music festival that Hamas just came in and killed everybody. And there was these reports of mass rape That was going on in the news for about 2 or 3 days until some various news organizations looked into it and said, well, wait a minute, there's no actual proof that this happened. But again, it's that whole idea of let's demonize Hamas, but really it's demonizing Palestinians. That's what it comes down to. So at this point, they are targeting the infrastructure of Gaza. I mean, they're targeting schools. The biggest university in Gaza was just bombed a couple days ago. Churches, yes, there are churches in Gaza. Hospitals and the medical area is one of the biggest areas that they're completely trying to destroy the whole medical system. There's right now there's 2 hospitals that are left, Al-Amal and Al-Nasser, that are in Khan Yunis, which is the second largest city. And these hospitals are where people are trying to, find cover. And you can imagine with the large number of wounded, they're bringing these people to the hospital while at the same time they're being bombed. So these 2 hospitals I just mentioned are the last 2 that haven't been closed or practically destroyed by the bombing, and they're bombing like right outside these hospitals. And there's a lot of statistics I won't go through now of the number of medical personnel, the number of clinics. There's like 300 medical clinics and that have been bombed. So the way to look at this, and I mentioned water supplies here, it's really a war on the entire infrastructure of Gaza. You're not only trying to kill people by bombing them, you're trying to destroy their whole medical system. You're cutting off electricity, you're cutting off water supplies and food. Because even right now they keep talking about bringing in food, and there's very, very little being brought in. As I mentioned earlier, there are ongoing attacks that are happening in the West Bank that the regular cable news and so on, you don't hear much of a report on that. So this was just on the 28th of December. There was 10 different cities that they broke into, damaged businesses. Yesterday, Nablus and Turkmen, I think hopefully I'll get that pronunciation right, was basically invaded by the Israeli occupation forces, and they damaged buildings. They killed about 11 people. One of the refugee camps that's near Nablus, they have surrounded so the people can't leave. So this is an ongoing Palestinian attack on Palestinians that's much bigger than Gaza. The last point here, and I put this under Western media distortions. Right now, President Biden and Blinken's running around the Middle East, and they have this idea that they're going to have a 2-state solution. And I mentioned last time that anybody who knows anything about the Middle East knows that that's impossible. With 500,000 settlers and expanding every day. I mean, there's no land left in the West Bank to actually even have a realistic state. And right now, Gaza has been just about completely destroyed. So, and in fact, they decided that they want this Palestinian state to come, that after the Gaza war is over, then we'll have the Palestinian Authority, and they'll be head of the state. And again, anybody that knows anything about Palestinian politics knows that the Palestinian Authority has no credibility whatsoever. So this is like a dream thing that they keep mentioning, even though most people would say, well, this is ridiculous. And in fact, about 3 days ago, and that isn't a misspelling. That's how I like to spell Netanyahu's name. He gave a speech and he said, while I'm after this war is over with, and after we destroy Hamas, and while I'm prime minister, there's not going to be a Palestinian state. I mean, he said, no, this isn't going to happen. And everything the government is doing is indicating that they're not going to allow any kind of Palestinian state. But we still have President Biden saying, well, we can have this two-state solution. So when you hear that, don't believe it. I mentioned last time that I was going to talk a little bit about applying the Islamic rules of war. Um, I'm going to kind of go through this fairly quickly because this is actually a good chart that kind of shows the different elements of the Islamic rules around war. And as I mentioned, Dr. Ramadan gave us a khutbah on this, that if you take the international rules of war, the Geneva Conventions, and so on, these rules of war are much stricter. And some of the basic things are not to be the aggressor. You certainly don't kill civilians. You can see, don't destroy a temple or a church. And a lot of this that's not on here, that if you know about the Prophet's peace and blessing be upon him, his life, a lot of the rules of the war was also, if there's an opportunity to have peace or have a truce, this is also in the Quran, that you're obligated to allow that to happen. Well, there's probably not even one of these things on this list that the Israeli occupation force hasn't done. And all people are wanting to do now is a ceasefire, so the hostages can be released and so on. Well, if you're following these rules, well, let's just put it that way. Obviously, the Israelis have no intention of following these rules. Some of the conclusions of this, and then I really want to have us spend some time on the what you can do. So we've pretty much established, I mean, Israel is an apartheid state. It's in violation of multiple international laws. You've had different groups like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the UN has come out and said that this is an apartheid state. So it used to be, as an activist, you would never hear that. Well, now you hear that quite a bit because that's, in fact, what's happening. It's also the longest military occupation in modern history. So this has been going on over 75 years. And one of the things that I heard somebody say, which I thought was a very good description, they always talk about Gaza being an open air prison. Well, this one person said, well, a prison suggests that you did something wrong to be there. And actually, it's more like a concentration camp. And you can probably understand why the mainstream media and so on doesn't want to use that term. But I don't know what you would call a state or an area like Gaza that's under complete control. People can't come or go or so on. And even last time I showed you the pictures of Bethlehem being surrounded by the apartheid wall. Looks a lot like a concentration camp to me. So the war on Gaza is genocide, and I put the article 2 of the convention. You can read that on your own. And that's been coming up more and more. And as you probably know, South Africa has started a case in front of the International Criminal Justice, the Court of Justice, basically saying that the war on Gaza right now, this is genocide. This needs to stop. Recently, Mexico and Chile also joined this case. So right now, they're just in the matter of presenting the case. And if you can find some of the videos online, there's a particular, and it's not just because she's Irish, but that's part of it. There's an Irish lawyer who's arguing the case for the South Africans that gives an amazing presentation. I mean, she just goes down like every single thing that said things were genocide in the past, and they all apply to apartheid Israel. And then of course, the other thing that I know even Elaine and I talk about this a lot, and it's so disturbing that, I mean, the U.S. government it's funding genocide. I mean, that's what it's doing. That's where these planes are coming from. That's where these missiles and the bombs and their all the weapons that Israel is using are all coming from us. They're the number one recipient of military aid, and they get at least $3 to $4 billion of aid every year. So as a country, we are definitely participating in this. But of course, we are not part of the International Court of Justice. We didn't sign up for that, probably because we might end up in it. So let's spend more time here talking about what you can do, and hopefully there'll be also more questions going through some of this. It's really important to educate yourself with the right sources, and educating yourself about what's really going on, and then talking to other people when they say, well, you know, I hear Hamas is this terrorist group and they did a massacre and that you can be the person that stands up and says, well, no, you know, I read about this, or I heard Brother Bill say this, or whatever. So a lot of the sources, I know some folks, brothers and sisters, talk to me about Al Jazeera, that you follow them. They're a good source. A couple of the best ones, Mondo Weiss is one of the best. That's their website there. They're the ones that right now they're doing daily reports on what's happening in Gaza. That's where I've been getting all my statistics from. You can go out to their site and, you know, sign up for like a daily or a weekly digest of information. They're particularly good. The other one is the Electronic Intifada. There's their address there. They do multiple articles, usually on different things. Like, for example, they did an article not too long ago on the destruction of the medical system in Gaza, or they'll talk about individual families or whatever. But their work is very, very good. The other one that the other newspaper that's actually quite good is the Guardian. They're a British newspaper, but you know, I give them a pass on that. But yeah, I read that every morning. Elaine, my wife, does too, and they do a much better job of reporting on international news, even whether it's about Palestine or and actually their news about the United States and the elections is pretty entertaining, because it's quite a bit different than what you typically hear. The other one is, don't forget the Muslim Journal. The Muslim Journal has been doing a great job in the past few issues. They've had, there's been a 2-part series on the misinformation campaign about Gaza. There's been a whole number of articles that have been quite good in the Muslim Journal just in the past few weeks. Okay, so let's talk about some other things you can do. I mentioned the BDS campaign, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanction campaign. The BDSmovement.net, that's the group's main site. And like I said, this has been going on since, what did I say, 2005. And at that time, every civil or political organization in Palestine all joined together to create this campaign. And it's been more successful, I'd say, in Europe than it has here, although it's had some successes here. And the main things that there are many things that you could focus on, but the ones that are listed here are the ones that the BDS movement is asking people to pay attention to. Now, there was and maybe one of the, it might have been Brother Rod, I can't remember who, somebody put a list on one of our text strings about the dates that are from Israel. to make sure that you boycott those. It was a long list of different brand names of different things. So what you can do, especially with Ramadan coming up, obviously that's important. We don't have a lot of fruits and vegetables here in the United States. They have a little bit more in Europe, but there are things like dates that you want to check and make sure that they're not made in Palestine, because often they'll say made in Palestine, but it's really made in a settlement in the West Bank. Sabra hummus is a very big one. If you go into any Jewel or any of the stores around here, that's the main Sabra, the main hummus brand that you see. And there are 2 or 3 other ones that are also made in Israel. So those you should definitely not buy. It's very good, unfortunately, but you don't spend any time with those. And you just check the labels, and most of the time the white label, like the Jewel brand or signature brand hummus, is made in here in the United States. The other ones here, like Hewlett-Packard, if you're thinking about getting a computer or a printer, don't buy Hewlett-Packard products. They manage all the surveillance infrastructure around the apartheid wall and so on. Puma is the sponsor for the Israeli football team. And in fact, I think there was that they've decided to not renew their contract. So there's some good news there. SodaStream is something I don't see it around that much anymore. The Palestinian Solidarity Group I was in had a big campaign against them. It's helped making carbonated veg. That would be interesting. Carbonated drinks and things like that. So, and they have a factory in the West Bank. So avoid that. Now, a couple of these other things I think will even be more applicable here for Masjid Al-Taqwa, for the community. It's very important to identify these various groups who, us being Muslims, there are Jewish groups out there that are very interested in having interfaith, initiatives and so on with Muslim organizations. And some of these, like the Anti-Defamation League, they're one of the worst. I mean, right now they actually have a uproar among their staff because of what's going on in Gaza, and these are organizations that are simply Zionists and they're pro-Israel. That's their main focus. And the Anti-Defamation League is a big supporter of, well, if you criticize Israel, you're an anti-Semite. And there's been a lot of that's been going on for a while. The American Jewish Committee is also one of the worst. Dealt with them in the past, where they have an arm that tries to work with, they actually came to the American Islamic College one time, and they were trying to sign up people to work with other Jewish folks to start a women's committee or whatever. Well, they do most of that just so they can say that we have Muslim support for Israel and so on. The other one at the bottom here kind of cuts closer to home. The Muslim Leadership Initiative. One of I believe it's the Masjid Muhammad in DC, participated in this. They run trips led by Israeli organizations over to apartheid Israel. And people come back and they say, see, we've got Muslims and Jewish people together, and again, this is propaganda. And I normally wouldn't be that critical of other imams or other masjids that might participate in something like this, but I think they need other people within the community to be critical and talk about, do you really realize what you're doing, or what you're being kind of co-opted here. The last thing, and then we'll certainly do some questions. Attending a protest or a vigil is important. There are protests by the coalition in Chicago just about every weekend, particularly if there's some major event that's happening. I know that Imam Tariq and several of us went to the vigil at Des Plaines, I believe. It's either Downers Grove or Des Plaines. I think it was Downers Grove. But that was a good example of an excellent interfaith protest and vigil. The groups that I mentioned, the Jewish Voice for Peace, the United States Palestinian Community Network was part of that, American Muslim for Palestine, and so on. Being part of those type protests and listening to speakers and that it is important. The other thing you can do certainly is to give funds. There's a lot of organizations out there that are doing Gaza relief. The Middle East Children's Alliance is one that's been doing that for a very, very long time. That's their address. Their money now is mainly going to support Gaza. And in fact, if you like Palestinian olive oil and other Palestinian products, they sell that on their site. They do a good job of supporting Palestinian collectives and farmers and so on. You can also contact Congress people, although my personal thing is I always feel like I'm just hitting myself in the head doing that because I'm tired of getting responses from Durbin or Kasten about how Israel needs to defend themselves. But people still need to do that, and they still need to hear from their constituents. The last thing I was going to mention here is that there is a Chicago ceasefire resolution that's coming up for a vote. It's supposed to be this coming week, this Wednesday. And I would say, that Chicago would be the first city to pass a resolution like this. So I would say it's worth contacting your alderperson if you live in Chicago and getting them to vote for this resolution. Again, it's another good publicity on the other side. And I think I will leave it at that. Okay. I'd like to hear if people have some questions or want to have some discussion about some of the things that I mentioned here. We actually have some time this time. Unlike last week where it went over about 10 minutes. But
I just want to invite people to place their questions in the chat as well. If they're uncomfortable taking themselves off mute, you can certainly use the chat feature that's available to you if that's more comfortable. And thank you again, Brother Bill. What again, such an informative presentation. May Allah continue to bless you and bless your work moving forward.
I to Brother Lionel's, Dr. Lionel's comments, Brother Bill. This is Brother Rod. Thank you again for the presentation. As he's mentioned, I wanted to mention a couple of quick points just for information purposes. And I know we have some people on the line who are affiliated with labor unions. You mentioned that the state of Illinois issued Israeli bonds, and I know that's been in the news lately. But for those of you who may not be aware, many labor unions for decades have had Israeli bonds. So you may want to look into that if you have a chance to. One of the other things that came up recently. I'm sorry.
No, I said that's a good one. Great.
Yeah. I know my union did for 40 years or more that I'm aware of. One of the other things I wanted to mention as part in light of your presentation, CNN, who you mentioned as part of the propaganda team, admitted not too long ago that many of their news stories that are related to the situation in Gaza and Israel are ran through the IDF before they're published, before they're reported in the media here. Another issue that came up was these tunnels that Israel claims that they have discovered, when in fact Israel helped build those tunnels in Israel. And the other thing that I would mention is that the Israelis, with billions of dollars, funded Hamas to prevent the Palestinian Authority from winning the election, the last election in Gaza. And lastly, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned the apartheid state of Israel. I know President Jimmy Carter called it that, and a number of others. Israel calls itself a democracy. What are your thoughts about that term as it relates to the current Israeli government?
Yeah, they well, it's for a long time they've talked about it being the only democracy in the Middle East, which again is another propaganda statement. If you look at the fact that it was founded and still is a Jewish state, that number one suggests that people do not have equal rights, which is actually the fact. And whether you're Palestinian or Christian, or you'll hear even a lot of complaints from particularly the Christian churches in Jerusalem about they're trying to push back the Israelis taking control of different areas that they're supposed to be responsible for. That usually the response that you'll get is, well, there are Arab. They don't call them Palestinian, but they'll say, well, there are Arab parties. Well, that's like saying, the United States is a democracy, and there's the Green Party, and there's this or that part. So the Arab Party has really no power, no control over anything. So it's absolutely not a democracy. And just the fact that if you want to be a citizen of Israel, all you have to do is be Jewish, and you can move there or whatever. And as I think I said last time, if you decided that somebody from the community here that you wanted to move to Israel, no, you're not going to be even accepted or potentially even let in. So that doesn't sound like a democracy to me, and certainly doesn't have the one person, one vote. Really has no meaning in that kind of situation.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
Bashir Assad. Like to make some comments and observations, and thank you again, Bill, for the information you provided for us in context of the situation in Israel, Palestine. A question first. Do you have any knowledge or background of the situation that existed among the Palestinians and the Jewish people that was existing, their life that existed prior to 1947, and that situation with Jews migrating into Palestine at that time?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you a very quick answer. Jews and Palestinians and Christians were all living very peacefully side by side for hundreds of years. Even on one of my trips there, I remember talking to this one Muslim family that was in Nablus. Actually, my son was with me then, and we were talking to them. And if you look out of Nablus, you can see, I think it was Jerusalem that wasn't too far away or whatever. And he said, yeah, we used to travel down there and go to the Israeli markets, and and they would come to our markets, and yeah, there wasn't any problem. And of course now it's all surrounded by walls and checkpoints and so on. So yeah.
Let me ask you too, do you know what kind of government existed during that?
Well, the original government was they were part of the Ottoman Empire. So the Ottomans, at least in that area, were kind of loosely governed in the sense that they, you know, if you were Muslim, if you were Jewish, if you were Christian, you could practice your religion, which for people who aren't Muslim on the line here, that was pretty typical of all Muslim empires. They didn't force anybody to be Muslim, and they did allow Jewish and Christian people to practice their faith. So that would be the main, and then that ended after World War I when the Ottomans were defeated along with Germany. But at that point, that area became under control of the British. It was like a British, became after World War II, it became like a British mandate. So everything was still pretty peaceful among all those people until the massive number of Jewish refugees from Europe after World War II started coming in.
Now, comment. We talked about this as a problem, and it's definitely a problem. We talk about it being apartheid situation, which we found in South Africa. We found that in America during the African American slavery. We found situations like that around the world, in Ireland, which you are aware of, and we've had many situations with similarities. And as Muslims, we have to go to our guidance, to the Quran and to the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad when we're dealing with any issue that we have. And all of these issues, the African American slavery issue, the Irish issue, the South African issue, and others, they took time. So now we have pointed out a problem. Now, how are we going to solve this problem? And Allah tells us in the Quran, when you see a wrong, the strongest thing you can do is to remove it with your hand. The second strongest you can speak out against. And the weakest is to have it in your heart. Imam Wardi Muhammad, in explaining or giving an explanation of that too, he was saying in some situations, man doesn't have the ability to remove it with his hands. And sometimes hands means control. And then the next option to us is to speak out against it. And thirdly is the one to have that wrong, to be opposed to it in your heart. So I'm looking at this situation and posing to us, okay, here's a problem. How are we going to solve that problem? And Imam too made us aware that many of these problems exist too in religion. Religious concepts that people have. So we look at Biden, and Biden says he's a Christian Zionist. And we have there in Israel a secular government. And as you pointed out, there's many Jewish organizations, religious organizations that are not in agreement with these secular positions that Israel has. I'd like to take us to what the Imam said, is that we have to remake the world. If we're looking at the world as it exists today and how it has come into a situation as it is today, and Allah says that we were all one humanity, and then we came into sex. And the Imam pointed out, in Remake the World, we have to go back, and man to understand again, that there's one God, there's one humanity, and all of this world is interconnected. And if we're going to have peace in this world, then we're going to have to come to that position. Now, it may take a while. We were 300 years in slavery. And it took a long period of time to get people to come to out of their error in thinking, their position, and it hasn't, completely gone away. So I would put that on the table that we have to remake the world. That situation there may take some time. We have to work on it, as there are many issues. The Uyghurs in Russia, and there's many situations that are happening in the world today. And we as a community have to strengthen ourselves. We have to become, as you mentioned, more knowledgeable in all of these areas and address these issues in a knowledgeable way and an intelligent way, and try to solve these issues that exist with humanity today. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Brother Bashir. I see there's a question in the chat. Do we have time for me to give a quick answer to that one?
Inshallah. Yes. Go ahead, Brother Bill.
Okay. The question is, so why is the United States defending Israel? Why does the United States not defend the Palestinians? The U.S. has had a very long history, as you know, of defending Israel as our primary ally in the Middle East. And actually, that's gone through every single administration. I think it was only the Dwight Eisenhower administration that challenged the Israelis. But pretty much no president has since then. And probably one of the main reasons is that, well, number one, that they are they're one of our main recipients of our weapons. So there's definitely a financial industrial complex issue there, where they buy and get more of our weapons than any other country in the world. But the domestic situation is more where there are Israeli organizations like AIPAC that most people, I think, know about. They're a political action committee that spends money on pro-Israel candidates, and they spend millions and millions of dollars, and they've been doing that for a very, very long time, and that goes to Democrats and Republicans. So I'm sure that during President Biden's campaign, they gave money to him, and I'm sure they'll give money to Donald Trump's campaign also. So that's the internal reason that you find a lot of our politicians in both parties do not want to challenge this idea that we should support Israel no matter what they do. Your thoughts, questions? We're a little over.
Yeah, we're a little over, but I'm a teacher, so I like to wait that 30 seconds of wait time before we move on. But I think everybody has offered their questions, or at least placed them in the chat. And inshallah, let's close out.
Can I jump in right quick, Brother Lionel? I promise you I won't be for 30 seconds.
Sure, Brother Clyde, jump in.
Brother Bill, first of all, absolutely amazing. And again, from the point of view of a teacher, I mean, it was so plain. Okay. Well, at some point, I think we may need to start having discussions that are a little bit more focused on the economic aspects of this, because economics drive politics, perhaps more than politics drives economics. And so, I'm not sure where it would start, but I just feel like that's something that's missing, and we need to probably talk about it and be more educated on it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, because there is a lot of economic benefit to the United States by keeping Israel around and keeping them as a great supplier. Some there's not a world war going on, so we have to have somebody that's going to buy all of our planes, artillery, and guns, and keep all that military industrial complex going.
Yeah, I feel like we could have a part 3 and 4 of this conversation. There's just so much that we've yet to uncover. There's so many different layers of complexity that should be explored with this really impactful issue that's, I think, we're experiencing in ways that we haven't experienced in many, many years. It's the situation has really brought this back to the forefront of our minds. And so again, Brother Bill, thank you for your expertise. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. And let's keep this conversation going. We'll have to have you back for a future Ta'Leem to continue the conversation, and maybe we can do some sort of roundtable, bring some more voices in the room, let folks interact with you and be able to pose their questions and engage in some dialogue, etc. So, yeah. So let's close
That'd be
out.
great, inshallah.
Inshallah. Let's close out in prayer, inshallah. Wallah. Inna linsana lafi kusur. Ila ladina amanu wa amilu salihati. Wa tawasaf bil haq. Wa tawasaf bis sabr. Amin.
Amin.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you all.
Beloved believers. Thank you for those who joined us, who you're not maybe members of Masjid Al-Taqwa, but members of the human family. We are excited that you are here to be with us and to benefit from the blessing that Brother Bill is. We ask that you continue to support Masjid Al-Taqwa. This Ta'Leem session has been recorded, and it will be placed on Masjid Al-Taqwa's YouTube channel. So if you know someone who might be interested in learning more about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, feel free to usher them to our YouTube channel. And again, we appreciate your support. Keep supporting our masjid. And again, on behalf of Masjid Al-Taqwa's Ta'Leem Committee and our resident imam, Imam Tariq El-Amin, we thank you for joining us this afternoon. Stay warm, but most of all, stay grateful. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Alaikum assalam.